Hey everyone, this is Fabio and welcome back. Today we're going to do a video response to the contests announced by Majora T, and we're going to enter the ring for the discussion on the question that he asked on his video, which is there a market for turn-based JRPGs outside of Japan? This is a very, very interesting question. I really hope that you're going to receive a lot of video responses, man, or comments, because it deserves to be discussed. It's a very interesting topic, and I have decided to give my humble opinion and my two cents of this because as a long time and die-hard JRPG and specifically turn-based JRPG fan, I found it very interesting. I have a lot of things to say. So let's just start it. I mean, is there a market for JRPGs, turn-based JRPGs outside of Japan? And to keep it simple, my answer is yes, of course there is. End of the video. Bye, guys. No. Is there a market? Of course. But I think that a question like this is a bit too simplistic, maybe, if I can say it. It's almost, I want to say, misleading, and because I think that there are no doubts that there is a market for this outside of Japan. I think that the real question is actually how big is this market that is undoubtedly there, because that's the key element in for these companies in order to release games here in the West outside of Japan, because of course we have to consider these are Japanese companies releasing games over here. For them it's a cost, probably not small, so they have to consider, is it worth it for us releasing these games to the West, because they know that we love JRPGs, but how many of us? That's the key answer. And his question was connected specifically with the case of Dragon Quest VII, since, as we all know, the remake port for the 3DS of the game took forever and a day to be released here in the West. And like, we're never probably gonna get Dragon Quest X in any ways. And I mean, but that it's strictly connected with the status of Dragon Quest, which is a topic on its own, I think, which of great interest, because as all of us JRPG fans know, like, Dragon Quest, it's a ginormous series in Japan. They go insane for Dragon Quest over there. Here in the West, it's never been popular. I mean, it's considered kind of niche, and it's weird for me to say, because all the channels that I follow all on YouTube and a lot of others that I follow here on YouTube are RPG fans, so we all know and love Dragon Quest. But I think that in the grand scheme of things of the gaming community and as gamers in general, it's definitely a niche. Dragon Quest has never been a success here in the West. It's famous the case that during the NES days, Nintendo Power, in order to spread the game, almost sounds like a desperate move, they gave the cartridges copies for free with the magazines. That's insane, because seeing how popular the game was in Japan, and then it didn't sell well in the States, in North America, since we didn't have it in Europe, of course, that was probably weird for Enix back then. And this continued on with the years. I think the only time that Dragon Quest really managed to reach the mainstream and the popularity levels that it deserves was with Dragon Quest VIII on the PlayStation 2. But after then, immediately after, I think it again faded in its niche weird status over here. So, and for this reason, since Dragon Quest VII, it's a massive game. I mean, I never played it because, again, it was never released in Europe on the PlayStation 1. So now that it's on the 3DS, that's the good reason for me to get the 3DS finally. I don't know why I still don't have that. I mean, I know why, but I really need a 3DS. And Dragon Quest VII could be a good excuse to buy that system. But apart from that, that's a massive game. So of course, to translate all of it and to then release it, like, it's probably a cost for this company, and they have to think again, as I said before, is it worth it for us? I think Square Enix don't really know that they actually have a strong fan base here. Maybe it's not as big as Final Fantasies or other series, but we're still very loyal and we all want our Dragon Quests. But to move on the question, the thing is, for me at least, I saw the different trends of turn-based JRPGs over the years, since I got into RPGs when I was very, very young, when I played the Ultima 6 on PC. That's the first RPG I ever played, even though I thought it was garbage. But the first Japanese proper JRPG I played was Phantasy Star 2 on the Genesis. Even though I didn't own it personally, a friend of mine had. I played it a lot, actually, and loved it. I mean, the genre clicked instantly, and as we can say, the rest is history. I mean, I kept playing JRPGs as long as I could back then, even though, personally, I was a Super Nintendo kid, and on that system in Europe back then, we had nothing. I mean, we didn't have the Final Fantasies, we didn't have Chrono Trigger, nothing. And it was really with the PlayStation 1 that JRPGs, and we have to consider that back then especially, 90% of JRPGs were turn-based. I mean, when I say JRPGs in general, I'm not talking about the whole genre, but this thing that because back then JRPG was almost synonymous with turn-based as a gameplay system, which is interesting in a way that nowadays JRPGs that used to be the standard became a sort of niche subgenre, and most of the RPGs nowadays are action RPGs. But I remember during the PS1, and even more during the PS2, I mean, those generations were defined by the RPGs, by the JRPGs. And then something happened, something interesting. I mean, there was this shift with the PlayStation 3, with the JRPGs becoming sort of niche again. They started to be not ignored, but they weren't mainstream anymore. Audiences moved on, probably. That's the reality, I think. They moved on to new genres that were more popular. And even more interesting, JRPGs moved mainly to the portable consoles. The DS, the PSP, the 3DS, the Vita. These are JRPGs powerhouses. I mean, the Vita, the PSP is defined again by the RPGs. It's the main genre. But the same, there are plenty on the DS and 3DS, and the Vita again is full of RPGs. So it's very interesting. While on the other hand, JRPGs are very, very rare on PS3, 360, on the Wii. I mean, there are some, of course, but I think that the main market for them nowadays is the handheld, which is very interesting. Because I believe that it's a symbol of this sort of, let's call it, decline in popularity. But it doesn't mean, again, this decline doesn't mean that there isn't a market anymore. It doesn't mean that RPGs are going to disappear. Not at all, actually, because and again, it's something very interesting, because the question, like, which is kind of the same of this one. I mean, is there a market for JRPGs? Like, are JRPGs done for it? Is there a future for JRPGs? I mean, this is not new. We basically have seen these kind of questions on articles and YouTube videos for a long time now. It's been years, probably since the end of the PlayStation 2, when the genre started to lose its mainstream status it acquired during the PS1 days. I think that actually nowadays it's in a weird excuse me. I think nowadays the genre it's on a weird status, because in a way I think it returned to its niche status that it had during the Super Nintendo days, where, but because of the fact that gaming nowadays it's much more popular, there never been as many gamers as today. Um, Even though, as I said, it's a niche genre, it's much bigger than it was back then, if it makes sense. But still, it's not mainstream. But to me, that's the natural order of things with gaming genres. I mean, it's always been like this. I'm not surprised. I mean, before the PlayStation 1 days, which it's when the JRPGs really boomed and became popular, they were there already. I mean, there was a market back then yet for JRPGs with the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis. Those consoles have a lot of excellent JRPGs. Look at, of course, the Final Fantasies, Chrono Trigger, the Lufia games, the Breath of Fire games, Super Mario RPG, just to mention some on the Super Nintendo. Look at the Sega Genesis. You have the Fantasy Stars, the Shining Forces, and what else? Now I cannot remember others, but there are more than this, trust me. But still, there were a lot of good 16-bit RPGs. It's kind of the generation that the genre was getting ready for mainstream, because due to the high quality of the games, more and more people were getting into this. But there were RPGs before that. I mean, on the NES, not in Europe, but like in North America, there were, just to mention the big three, like Phantasy Star 1, Final Fantasy 1, and Dragon Quests 1 through 4. I mean, there's plenty already. And there are others, but maybe they were starting to get out of Japan, because before that, I mean, that's when JRPGs were basically created, in the early 80s. So there was this trend. I mean, they were becoming more and more popular until they reached mainstream with the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, and then they faded a little bit, returning in a way to their, maybe you can call it, natural place. And that's interesting, because I think that maybe nowadays they're sort of coming back. I think, I don't know if they will hit mainstream again, but I think the way I see it, it's that they are being out of mainstream enough to kind of return it. But I don't think they will become again the main genre, because I don't see it happening. But again, this drop in popularity absolutely didn't influence the fact that there is a strong market for JRPGs in general. But if we talk about turn-based, however, that's kind of a different story, I think. Because, as I said before, nowadays turn-based has become a sort of niche subgenre of the whole JRPG family, let's call it like that. Because I believe it's something that gamers, especially nowadays, and especially new gamers, see as a sort of archaic system. They think that it's something out of old games, and console needs to, like, games need to constantly improve it, constantly change themselves, which to me it's not absolutely necessary. I mean, it's true that we need to improve and to evolve, but I said it multiple times on multiple videos, to me turn-based is the best gameplay system for RPGs, and you can work with that. It doesn't mean that it has to be an arcade system. I mean, modern games these days showed us that you can update a turn-based combat system, a turn-based gameplay, and it can work perfectly. The perfect example to me, it's the Trails of Cold Steel games. I still need to play Cold Steel 2, because that game will be released only in November here in Europe. I know, but Trails of Cold Steel, it's, I mean, people played it, everybody was like, wow, this game is amazing. Of course it is. And look at that, it's a turn-based RPG, nothing more. It has that typical Legend of Heroes hybrid combat system between a turn-based and a strategy game, but it's still turn-based. It's just a bit updated to be like not seen as a very archaic, stuck in the past system, but it's still turn-based. So it clearly shows that it can work. And I was thinking like the 3DS. I don't know about that because, as I said, I don't own a 3DS yet. But I remember that Bravely Default was a massive success and kind of opened Square Enix eyes, and they say, oh well, JRPGs are still successful if they are done well. So maybe we can focus once more on quality JRPGs. I was like, wow, you don't say. Square Enix want to focus on JRPGs again. Who would have thought? But again, it shows that if done well, even a simple system like turn-based can work fine nowadays. And I think there is more that we have to think about it, because naturally, I said it, I love turn-based, it's my favorite system, but I'm more of the old school side of the barricade. I mean, I'm an old school gamer. I love my old school games. What about new gamers, new generation of gamers coming into the field today, and how can we like persuade them to say, like, trust me, turn-based JRPGs are good games, even though the system maybe it's not cinematic like, I don't know, Uncharted or The Last of Us or stuff like that, even though it's not a first-person shooter, even though you don't play necessarily online, but you can still have a lot of fun with this system. I believe that a good instrument for that, even though being, like, as I say, I'm an old school gamer, mentioning iOS might be considered weird, but let's face it, it's one of the ways of the future for the industry, like it or not. Personally, I'm not too keen on the idea to have like my phone as a gaming system, but I played a couple of games on this, and look at that. The games that I played were Dragon Quest 1 and 2. I still need to play 3 because I haven't finished 2 yet. I'm lost in that game. I'm terrified of the idea that I have to start it again, but I'll do it, because since this whole video started because of Dragon Quest 7, let me tell you, the iOS ports of Dragon Quest are fantastic. They're probably, I will dare say, the definitive way of playing those games, and a really good way to spread the love for these old school turn-based games to a new generation of gamers. So I don't mind that companies, especially these Japanese companies, are maybe focusing more than we liked to us, like old school gamers, to see companies like Capcom, Konami. I mean, I know that thou shalt not speak Konami's name, but whatever. And nowadays, even Nintendo are focusing more on the mobile market. That's not a stupid thing. I mean, yes, of course, we prefer our consoles, but these companies have to look at the market. Phone market generates a ton of money for them. Look at Pokemon Go. That thing made so much money for Nintendo that it's insane. So there's nothing wrong with that. And also we have to consider the fact that, as I said, of course, these are Japanese companies. The mobile market is massive in Japan, even more than here probably. So it makes sense for them to focus on that. Of course, maybe I'm not very happy of the idea that the next Breath of Fire game, whatever the hell Breath of Fire 6 will be, it's a mobile game, even though probably we're not gonna get it here in the West. But that's another story. But again, or the Square Enix publishing these iOS ports of Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, I think it's a great idea in order to spread the love of these games and these old school games, especially if they're done well. And so far, I'll say they're definitely doing a good job. The Dragon Quest ports are fantastic, I think. It's really a good way to make new generations aware of the greatness of these old school classics. Because I remember reading an interview to, I think it was I don't remember if it was Square Enix president or Yuji Horii. I don't remember that, but about they were talking about the fact, why are you not making more Dragon Quest to the West? And they were kind of explaining like the differences between how Dragon Quest is appreciated in Japan and how it's appreciated in the West. And reading that, it made sense. It was saying reasonable things. I mean, it was like, well, there's nothing we can do. I mean, Dragon Quest, it's not as loved in the West as here in Japan for us to make too much effort, because if it doesn't work, we can lose a lot of money. So again, I'm not. I try not to look at these companies as the enemy if it's possible. In some cases, it depends, but they probably have their reasons. I mean, who knows? But again, to return to the original question, I think that there absolutely is the market, but it depends on how big it is. And that made me think to the video response made by the Funny Nerd. Definitely check it out. It's an interesting video, and it's the main point that Leo was making, which was a good point, is that it was saying, like, look at this. There are plenty of new games, turn-based RPG that are released constantly, and that I think proves my point. To say that it shows that there is a market, hence we're getting them. But I was also thinking maybe too negative for my from my part, but look at realistically. I mean, it was showing like 95% of the games it was showing were portable, and the only, like, if I remember well, I've seen a couple of days ago, the only like PS4 JRPGs that it was showing are just remakes, and not coincidentally Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XII. And I mean, does it count? I mean, not really to me, because those are remakes, and it also shows that Square Enix, it's playing extremely safe by just remaking Final Fantasy games on the PS4, because of course those are going to sell. Final Fantasy is a class of its own, and old school fans are going to buy it, and Final Fantasy is such a famous name that even newer, sort of like newcomers into the RPG are going to buy it simply because it's Final Fantasy. But why these 3DS and Vita new release are not on the PS4, for example, or the Wii U, or the Xbox 360, or the Xbox One? The answer is quite simple, actually, to me. And unfortunately, it's not the kind of answer that I like, but to me, there's only one reason. Companies are aware that these JRPGs are not as popular as they used to be, and because gaming, like making games, has become really expensive, it's probably not worth them. It's not worth it to them making. What could be an example? I don't know. No, I cannot find it. Let's say a game like on the Vita. What could it be? Like that it's not a remake or it's a full new JRPG. I mean, because Trails of Cold Steel has been remake also for the PS3, which is interesting, PS3 and not PS4. But I think that's Falcom is safe for that. I cannot think of a good example. I mean, Grand Kingdom is a turn-based RPG. It's not really. It's a strategy RPG. Well, it's kind of turn-based, so. But I think it's also on the PS3 or 4. I don't remember. Well, anyways, 3DS games are on the 3DS and not on the Wii U, simply because the 3DS, it's much more successful than the Wii U, as we know, and probably making a JRPG exclusively for the PS4, it's not a safe bet for these companies, I think. But we'll see. Maybe things will change. I believe that The genre is strong, very strong on the portable market, and eventually maybe it will return to a more mainstream status. I mean, to see more JRPGs on the main consoles, because I'm not sort of downgrading the excellent consoles such as the 3DS or the Vita, of course. But I believe they are in the genre, the turn-based JRPGs are in a sort of weird status. I mean, the next big names coming out soon are Persona 5, which honestly I don't know if it's turn-based or it's going to be more action-oriented, but being Persona, it might be turn-based. But I haven't followed it because I'm not the biggest SMT fan. And of course, Final Fantasy 15. That's the big one. Instead of those remakes, that's the one to look for. And I haven't played the demos, and I'm not sure about it, but from what I read, it might be a bit more of a hybrid between an action and a turn-based RPG. The same thing for what I saw, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, even though I'm not interested in it, it looks as a sort of action RPG again. But we'll see. That was just like some footage and stuff like that, nothing definitive. So I think to end this video, because I can go on for hours on this, but there's definitely a market for JRPGs, turn-based JRPGs, and probably a quite strong one. But the key issues here is to understand how strong it is actually, because that's the key element in getting or not getting the games. Because one part of me will think that it's not that big, unfortunately, but it's coming back, because recently, like, good games on multiple systems such as the 3DS and the Vita and the PSP before it showed that updated turn-based JRPGs can work and can be successful, because that's the key there. I mean, Treasure Cold Steel, Bravely Default, and other games show this. So that's it, guys. That's the video response. Definitely check Majora T's video, or I mentioned it, but check the Funny Nerd response. I'll see you next time, and take care.